Okay, my name is Mark Gallagher. I was born in Danbury. My parents lived on Main Street when I was born. I was the eighth born child of Elizabeth, or Betty Ann Wickstead Gallagher, and William Gallagher, also known as Bill Gallagher.
And when was that?
October 29th, 1960.
Happy early birthday.
Thank you. And let's see, one of my older sisters died as an infant, so Monica was gone. So then there ended up being 14 of us. So,
wow.
So I have 6 sisters and 7 brothers. So they're 6 older and 7 younger than I am.
Wow, that's amazing.
So, and out of the 14, we're all still alive. So it's kind of cool.
That is cool. So tell me a little bit about why you wanted to participate in the Oral History Project.
Okay. My family, we are all storytellers. We have always talked about things. I've always been known as a storyteller. So, and I have 4 daughters who are, Colleen's 32, Erin's 31, Monica's 29, Megan's 27. And they've heard my stories again and again and again. So they've had me start writing them down. So I have a list of them that I forgot to bring of all the things they want me to write down about, because their friends all know my stories. And so I've started to write some of them down. I have them in Google Docs. And then this came up, and my wife works here, and she said, you have to come in and record things. You talk about things in Danbury all the time. And because I grew up here, I'll be 58 this month, and it's what I've known. Mm-hmm. So I decided, okay, I'll go do it.
So is there a particular story that you want to start with?
Well, just the one I was talking about, that James Doyle brought the first priest to Danbury to say Mass in his living room. And that was the start of St. Peter's Parish, which is one of the oldest parishes in the city. And I am 6th generation from James Doyle. So, and that's on my mother's side. And it was something my mother and my aunts were all very proud of, because my mother was also the youngest of 12.
Wow.
So there are a lot of us.
Mm-hmm.
So growing up, I'm one of 45 first cousins on my mother's side. And then I have 8 other cousins on my dad's side.
Wow. Do you have a particular story from your childhood in Danbury that you would like to share with us?
From my childhood in Danbury.
Or things that you remember, that you remember fondly?
Actually, things that I remember fondly were being able to, we used to walk to the library all the time. And that part of the deal was walk to the library. In the children's section downstairs, there were big murals on the wall. And we would go in and pick out my mother, Aunt Joan, Aunt Dorothy, Uncle Ed, Uncle Bob, Uncle Bill, because they were children when the artist was painting that, and they were asked to come and play in a field, and they did this for a while. I think it was several weeks, and that he was painting them all.
Oh, wow.
And so their pictures still hang on that wall.
It's still in there now?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's
no
part
kidding.
of. Oh, yeah. It's part of the Danbury Music Society now. But there were articles in the paper. I actually have some of that, because Dorothy Kane was my aunt, who everybody knew Aunt Dorothy because she taught 2nd grade at South Street School for ages.
Mm-hmm.
And so she always knew who everybody was in the picture. So, but it's still there. The artist's children, I think, made a donation to do some kind of preservation to it a number of years ago.
Oh, okay.
So you haven't seen it? You work
have
in the
not.
library.
I work in this library.
I know, but you have to go look.
I will have to go look. Maybe we can include like a photograph of it when we put your story on there.
I'll have to pull it out. I know I have, because it was in the New Times, so like you can pull it up out of the New Times.
I'm sure, yeah.
But there were a whole bunch of kids who were there, and my mother knew, like, my mother could, if we were there with my mom, she would tell us who all of her siblings were,
mm-hmm.
but then she could tell us who all these other kids were that they knew, because it was all Danbury.
Right.
And everybody played together. And
right.
So, and I went to St. Peter's School down the street. I was in 4th grade when there were 2 brothers, and I can't remember their names, but they came to rob the banks in Danbury. and they blew up the police station.
What?
The police station was a tall brick building that looked a lot like St. Peter's School.
Mm-hmm.
And it stood where, well, now it's the, what is it, Community Health Center. That used to be the police station.
Mm-hmm.
And I can remember we heard it, we all ran to the windows, and then there was, and like you could see where things had fallen down, and you could see all the smoke coming out of the windows of the police station because somebody had walked in and left a bomb in the police station.
Oh, my goodness.
But then they came down Main Street, and I want to say it was Union Savings Bank, and they blew up Union Savings Bank. And then further down Main Street, where it is now the new apartments, the condominium
Mm-hmm.
apartments, that used to be the old Danbury Mall, and they blew up a car in the parking lot, and it landed on the roof of the mall.
Oh, my gosh.
So when this all happened, because the bombs were going off one after another down Main Street, they thought it was gas. And so we had a fire drill. We ended up out in the schoolyard. But then they didn't want us to go back in the building because other things were still blowing up, and they were worried if it was gas and it was connected. So we all had to walk down Main Street towards the War Memorial,
Mm-hmm.
walk away from it. And on the way, then I grew up on Grand Street. So where Dunkin' Donuts is now down Main Street,
Mm-hmm.
it used to be called the South End Market. And we knew the four brothers who ran it. It's where my mother, my grandmother, all my aunts all shopped there. It was an IGA supermarket. But there was a path that went from their parking lot up into my backyard. So my older brothers and sisters who were in school collected each of us,
Mm-hmm.
and we just got to skip out of line. Like the teachers all let us go home. They knew where we lived, and so we walked home.
Oh, my goodness.
So that was some things that happened downtown
Yeah.
when I was a kid.
Oh, wow. I see you have some notes. Do you have other
I do.
things in particular that you wanted to discuss?
Let's see. I was going to talk more about my family because
Sure.
my father's parents were Julia Corbett Gallagher. She grew up over on Cherry Street in Danbury, which is now, they changed it. It's what's his name? They named it after the reverend from the church over there. I can't think of what it is.
Mm-hmm.
But she grew up there. But we called my grandmother Mondi. Just my family did, because when my oldest brother was a baby and they were trying to get him to say grandma, he came out with Mondi, and she said, if he wants, I'll be his Mondi. So to all of us, he was Mondi. To all of my other cousins, she was grandma.
Right. Well, that's the way it works, right?
Yeah. I never knew my grandfather because he died. He had cancer, and he died before my parents were ever married. And but everybody talked about him as Daddy Frank. And he was a plumber, and his brother was a carpenter. And they built a house over on Gallagher Lane and created Gallagher Lane, which is still there.
Mm-hmm.
It's over off Route 6, and I can't think, is it Coyote something? There's a bar over there. And Gallagher Lane runs through their parking lot and up into the back.
No kidding.
Yeah. So, and that was Gallagher Lane. And my grandmother's siblings were John, Kay, May, and Nona. So it was John Corbett, Kay Corbett, May Cassidy, and Nona Corbett. And Kay Corbett ended up being a teacher in New York City, and she had a great life and did a lot of crazy things because Nona was a nurse, and she ran hospitals in places. So I actually have a picture in my dining room of Kay and Nona at Joe's Bar and Grill in Havana, Cuba.
Oh, wow.
Because she ran a hospital there.
Mm-hmm.
But then when Castro took over, she left Cuba. She went to Argentina to start a new hospital in Argentina. So in the summer, Kay went to Argentina. But while she was there, civil war broke out in Argentina, and they shut down all of the shipping, so she couldn't get out. But she had to be back at school because you got fined for every day you missed when school started in New York City.
Oh, wow.
And so Kay hunted around in the harbor and she found that there was a banana boat that was going to sneak out at night under darkness and they were heading towards Boston. So she hitched a ride on a banana boat from Argentina to Boston, arrived in Boston like 2 days before school started, and jumped on a train, like got off the boat, went and got on a train, and arrived back in New York City the day before school started.
Oh my gosh. Doesn't even sound real.
But it's all, and there somewhere, there's a picture. Kay Corbett was a tiny little person. She was a lot of fun. We used to play cards with her. She made us laugh all the time. Mm-hmm. But there's a picture of her in a white sailor suit on these steps going along the side of a ship. And she's got a sailor hat on and this white sailor suit, and it's much too big on her. But she's, like trying to hold up the pants and wave, and we always say that was from when she got on the banana boat. So then, let's see. So that was Kay. That was Kay and Nona. May Cassidy was another sister, and when I was a kid, she lived across the street in the Martha Apartments. And that was the only place in town we knew of that had an elevator. Oh. So we used to come to the library, and then we would cross Main Street and go up in the elevator to visit May Cassidy. And she always had cream soda. We didn't have soda at our house. Like, there were too many kids. Like, we had iced tea all the time. And so we'd go visit May Cassidy, and she'd have cream soda for us. So to this day, if I pull out cream soda, I think of May Cassidy. And then the other thing we used to do when we go to the library is going home, we would walk further down Main Street, and across from the Danbury Museum, there used to be a house. It just got taken down, and it was owned by the Clearys. And Brian Cleary is my brother Peter's age. They had an older brother, Don. I don't know where he is these days. But Mr. Cleary's mother lived on one side of the house. And so I swear my mother must have called all these people to say we were going to the library, because we would walk home by going up their driveway and then cross over into a parking lot. And there was, we call it a lane. It used to be a driveway that kind of got overgrown that went up to Grand Street. But we would walk in their driveway, and Mrs. Cleary would be waiting. She'd be like, "Come on in, I have milk and cookies," and she'd have fresh baked cookies or a cake or something. I mean, like, I lived the life of Riley. Like, we all had a great time doing this. So these are memories of going to the library. Yeah. It's like walking home with your books and stopping here, there, and everywhere.
And would this be all 14 of you?
No, there'd usually be a handful of us, because, okay, so we talk about ourselves as the older kids, the middle kids, and the little kids. So, like, Michael, Maureen, Anne, and Peter, and sometimes Leo were considered the big kids. Pat, who is my Irish twin, she's only 11 months older than I am, which actually there's 3 sets of Irish twins in my family. So usually it'd be Pat, Matthew, Nona, maybe Franny would be going together. Because Franny, Tommy, Julie, Joan, and Jim were the little kids. So
it's just little clusters of you. I see.
I mean, it's how it was, because one, there's always somebody to play with. Because, okay, in my neighborhood, we were the Gallaghers. The Hallises lived at this end of Grand Street. They had 10 kids. Let's see, Petersons had 4 kids. Olenizaks had, let's see, there's Christine, Joanne, Davy, Kathy, Joey, and Tommy. So they had 6 kids. O'Mara's had 12 kids. They lived around the corner. Riddles lived on Deer Hill, and they had 10 kids. I mean, there were lots of kids in the neighborhood. And then there were a couple of houses that had rentals, so there were always other kids who came and went in the neighborhood. And like my backyard, I lived on Grand Street. We had a 6-bedroom house, and it was built on a hill, so the front of the house was up, but then it sloped down, and there was a plateau in the back, and the playroom door came out the back. But then there was another hill that went down. At the bottom of that hill, in the center and the bottom, was first base. There's a tree over to the left, and there's and these were just dirt spots, and that was home plate.
Mm-hmm.
There was a hump between our yard and Moore's yard, because our yards were long and narrow, and that was second base. Third base kind of moved a little bit because it was in a muddy patch of the yard, so it was over there. And like the outfields were Moore's yard and Ellis's yard.
Mm-hmm.
And John, I want to say it was John and Jane Moore lived next door. I want to say Jane. I just knew her as Mrs. Moore. And they would sit out on their back patio and watch us play.
Mm-hmm.
Like the yard was for the kids to play in, and he
Right.
mowed it. And Mr. Moore would walk around. He had his pocket knife, and he would cut out all the dandelions out of his yard. But on the other side of our yard, there was an empty lot. So it's where all the neighbors just threw their clippings and everything. So as he walked through our yard, he would cut all the dandelions out of our yard too. So it's like we just didn't have dandelions
Mm-hmm.
as a kid. So like when I look in my yard now, I'm like, God, I have so many dandelions. I wish Mr. Moore were here. And the funny thing is, my current neighbor is Kevin Moore. So I live next to Mr. Moore again.
Oh, wow. Related?
No.
Oh, that would be funny if he was.
I know. No, but I went to school with my neighbor's grandson was in my brother Matthew's class. His sister Debbie was in my class, but he was Kevin Moore, and now my neighbor's Kevin Moore.
A coincidence.
So it is.
What do you think are like the most marked differences in Danbury from when you were growing up to now?
The big differences, I see how, like, to me, Main Street's changed hugely.
Mm-hmm.
Like, okay, this building I'm in right now, at one time was a furniture warehouse store.
Really?
There were two of them. There was one here and one across the street right over there.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember when they both closed. I remember when this bank was built, and then you guys took it over. I remember when the new Danbury Library was built, and all that they had to offer, and how much, it was closer for us to walk,
Mm-hmm.
and that was a big thing. When I was a kid, Mom, we're going to go to the library today. Okay, who's going? And we would just tell her, and we'd all go. And we would walk.
Mm-hmm.
Now, parents would never let their kids just take off and go walk,
Right.
How many blocks away and walk downtown. And I mean, when I was in high school and I worked at Bardo's, we all went to Immaculate High School. So I walked to school,
Mm-hmm.
I walked home, and then I'd walk downtown. And the thing was, Bardo's was open oftentimes, like, well, I guess it was only on Friday nights we were open till 9 o'clock at night, because usually they closed at 5:30, but they were open till 9, and I'd walk home.
Mm-hmm.
Like,
How old were you?
let's see, I started at Bardo's when I think I was only 15 when I started working there,
Mm-hmm.
because my first job was working at the South End Market. I started there when I was 13.
Oh, wow.
But working there, it was run by 4 Lebanese brothers. There was Tom, Miller, Marshall, and Mike. But to me, they were my uncles. Like, we always called them Uncle Miller, Uncle Tom, Uncle Marshall, Uncle Mike.
Mm-hmm.
And so if anybody ever came in and they saw a kid working in the store, it's like, well, they would never question it, because I'd be like, Uncle Marshall, what should I do with this? Uncle Miller, what should I do with that? It's like I'm talking to them as my uncles.
Right.
And here I am totally Irish. And here I am in a store working for 4 Lebanese brothers. But that was how Danbury was. Growing up, Wixted and Gallagher were the 2 most prominent names in the city.
Mm-hmm.
And I was both of them.
Mm-hmm.
No matter where I went, everybody knew who I was.
Right.
I grew up in a fishbowl, I
Mm-hmm.
tell everybody. Because when things have happened to me, and okay, I've had 3 strokes. When I had my first 2 strokes and I went on disability, then my neurologist said, go find something to do. They sent me to see a career counselor. I walked in, it was Mark Henry. I knew him.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, oh, do you want someone who doesn't know you? I'm like, yeah, but you could transfer me to 6 other people and I'll probably know them too, or they're going to know my brother or somebody. So it's like, it doesn't matter.
Right.
It's like, everybody knows what happened to me. It's not a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, it's just what happens in life.
Mm-hmm.
Some people are very private and think that they can like hide from everything in the world, and it's like, no, I grew up in a fishbowl. Everybody growing up, everybody knew who I was, and if something happened, it reached mom before you ever got home.
Right.
So there was no getting away with things.
So before we finish, is there anything else that you would want to share? Anything you missed?
I don't know. Let's see. I'll tell you about my other grandparents were Grace Freeland and Sylvester Wickstead. Freeland's ran Freeland Funeral Home in Danbury, and my Uncle Bob took it over, and he ran it until he passed away. And their kids were Sylvester, Edwin, was Uncle Ed, Uncle Bill, Bob, Leo, Fran, and Charles. Charles died as a child, so I never knew him. Leo died in the war. He was a pilot, and his plane went down over the Pacific somewhere. And then the girls were Mary, Grace, Dorothy, Joan, and my mother was Elizabeth. And a funny story was that Mary was a fourth grade teacher at St. Peter's School, and she was my father's fourth grade teacher when my mother was in kindergarten.
Oh, no kidding.
And Mary had a car. So my mother would go upstairs to her classroom after school and wait to get a ride home. And so one of the funny stories was that my father had to stay after school one day, and Mary was in the hall, my mother was in the classroom, and she walked over to my father's desk, and she took his ruler and she told him he had been a bad boy, and she smacked him with the ruler. And he always said that he would get even with her. And he married her and gave her 15 kids. But the thing was, out of the 5 out of the 5 girls, 4 of them became teachers. My mother had a degree in social work, but Mary, Grace, Dorothy, and Joan were all teachers.
Oh, wow.
So.
All right. Well, so my plan is I can send you this in its entirety, so you can just have it for yourself.
Okay.
And then I'm going to be all of the histories. I'm going to be sort of pulling like a really interesting clip. Like I love your story of the explosions, and then ideally uploading that to. We're going to be putting them on our website, provided you sign the release for it.
You can have it.
And then because that's something that's like documented, like maybe adding other like. Clippings from the News Times or something, alongside your oral history.
Okay.
And so once we have several more stories collected, that's when we're going to put them all up on the website and then continually add to them. So this was really great.
Did I get to any of all this?
I don't know.
I touched on South End Market. I touched a little bit on Bardo Platt because I worked at Bardo Platt for Charlie and Lillian Bardo. Charlie I actually have his memoir, and I should probably give it to you because he wrote it.
Oh, wow.
It's like his history, and he was known, like if you look in the News Times, he was known as Mr. Danbury because he did a lot for the city. But he sold the store to Mike Seaman. I worked for Mike, and now his daughter, Ellen Lyle, works here at the library.
Yeah.
So
we know Ellen. We love Ellen.
Yes. Ellen's a wonderful, wonderful person. So let's see. I did talk about that. I talked about the painting. I talked about South End Market, Bardo Platt. I guess we all went to St. Peter's School. Grandpa Wickstead was in the first graduating class from St. Peter's School. There were
kidding.
13 boys. So since then, all of my aunts and uncle, all of my mother's siblings all went to St. Peter's School. My father and his 2 brothers both went to St. Peter's School. Dad had 2 brothers, Frank and Paul. Uncle Frank ran a gas station over in Germantown. I was in, I think, 4th grade when a kid came in to rob him at night and ended up shooting him, and he died.
Oh, my gosh.
So, let's see. I was born in the house on Main Street. We built the house on Grant Street. I have stories about selling the house on Grant Street. I had all these things. And how JK's moved from West Street to where it is now and what it was before that.
What was it before that?
Originally it was built as the Little Red Hen. There used to be a milk machine on South Street right down there. And for 25 cents you got a quart of milk. For 50 cents you got a half gallon. Well, we went through a couple of gallons of milk every day.
Well, I
And
imagine.
it was
14
it was cheaper to go buy it out of the milk machine.
Mhm.
So that was Matthew and I had that job, and we used to walk down to the milk machine and get the milk and bring it home. So, but if we always had extra money, we would stop at the Little Red, because it was Little Red Hen, and then it was Davy's Fish and Chips, and then it was something else before it became JK's. But it's been JK's the longest.
Mhm.
So
Milk machine. That's fascinating to me.
it was just a big refrigerated machine that, like,
Dispensed milk.
just like one side put out quarts and the other side put out half gallons.
Oh.